Welcome, listeners, to a brand new bonus episode of Oh My Word podcast. And today we have a super special treat because for the first time ever, we have a artist, cover designer, someone so amazingly talented with us today. That's Leo Nickolls. And you've probably seen his work, and now you're going to hear all about, like, how does the magic happen? So, Leo, welcome to the podcast.
Hello there, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, and I'm so excited. Usually I start off with asking, how did you get into this and all the kind of stuff, but I think there's a more pressing question to ask first, and that is, and we may as well address it up front. Who do we need to bribe to make sure that you are the one who designs our book covers?
I don't know. Yeah, any of the big major publishers in the US, and I'm pretty happy.
Okay, so you're not going to give us the secret.
It's a tricky one to answer, really, I suppose. I'm working on a project at the moment with an author's estate rather than the publisher directly. That's been a much easier process. So, I don't know, actually. Yeah, I've got a lot of ways on how to answer that one. HarperCollins US, I'd be happy with them as a client for the rest of my days, but that's not to discount the other lovely clients I've got out there either. So yeah.
Okay, this is going to be interesting. So just because we're probably going to return to that a little bit about how you get your projects, but just starting from the beginning, how did you even get into cover design? Was that something that I always dreamed of, designing a book cover so people could judge a book by its cover, or was it something you sort of fell into through art or anything or something else?
Yeah, well, it took me by surprise, really. Life kind of intervened with it. So originally, when I was about 18, 19, I was supposed to go to Brighton University, which is about an hour outside of London. I was going to be studying media studies rather than anything creative, art-wise, anything like that. But as a kid, I grew up reading comic books and drawing my favourite, Spider-Man, Batman, all that kind of stuff. And at the age of 19, I found out that I was to become a father, which put my university plans somewhat askew, so I could no longer go to Brighton. So I had to choose somewhere local. I live in Norwich, which is about 3 hours away from Brighton. And I thought I would try the local art school. And whilst I was there in the second year of the degree, we were given a project to do book covers. And it ignited my interest from there, really, because there was so much other stuff on the graphic design course, which was designing packaging for food or quite generic commercial graphic design. But for me, a book cover, when we were given the project, it felt like it was such a fertile area of graphic design or illustration where you had a lot more reign of creativity and you could be far more expressive. And growing up as a kid, I loved book covers anyway. I loved how they would colour the story for me. They would give me the aesthetic of the story as I was reading it, if that makes any sense to you.
Yeah, wow. That's amazing. Not to dwell on it too much because it doesn't have as much to do with the book cover. So you didn't go to Brighton so that you could stay closer to your child, and that's how you ended up at a different college or university that then led to some sort of graphic design, which then led to book covers.
Yeah. I owe my book career to my son, Alfie, yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. I don't know, maybe it doesn't seem like a big thing, but I think it's a big deal, but not everyone makes those kind of decisions. Wow, that's amazing.
No, it was the best possible outcome. Yeah. I started amazingly young as a father, but yeah, the right outcome, yeah.
Wow, amazing. That's amazing. So you originally so it sounds like you start off with the course for graphic design, and then one of the assignments was the book covers, and that's how you got into the book covers.
Yeah. So after that, I quite stubbornly forced every project afterwards into being book covers, much to my tutor's dislike. But I don't know, by the time that you do a big degree show at the end of it where all your stuff gets marked, and I was able to take all the stuff off the wall because they're all book covers, and then just make myself a huge pest around any publisher that I could get a phone number from.
Oh, is that the way it officially works to get on board, or you kind of took your own path that you just took almost your portfolio of book covers and just sent it out?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if that's how it works these days, but back in 2007, it seemed to work for me, yeah.
So you don't have an agent or a business manager or someone who makes those connections for you. You kind of deal with all that on your own?
I do. Yes, I do. I've tried to get an agent before, but I think I don't know. I think it seems to me like my style, all the genres of books that I do are quite varied. I tend to skew more towards young adult or fantasy stuff more these days, but I think that's been quite an organic process. But I think I'm too varied for an agent. So it's been just an accumulation of a number of years of me being pests with all these publishers and just, getting a nice list of clients to get regular work from.
Yeah, because so I originally knew, I heard your name and seen your work just because I was speaking to Lynn Kelly, who wrote Song for a Whale. I told her, I said, I love this cover. And she was like, oh yeah, Leo Nickolls designed it down. I was like, that's it. Who is this person and what has he done? And then when I saw all your covers, I was like, wow, that's a very big, I didn't expect to be seeing adult stuff there and everything there. So
yeah, there's a fair few on there. Yeah, but that's ever so nice of Lynn to say that. It's very nice of her. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, Lynn's great. We'll give her a shout out. Everyone could go back to that episode to listen to Lynn. She's great. So, is there a difference between designing covers and actually doing artwork within a book? Is that considered two different departments, or do you also sometimes get a project to actually design some sort of artwork within the pages of a book?
So the only times I've been asked to do inside illustrations for a book, that's happened twice. I'd like to do more of it because it's great fun. I tend to be more interested in illustration than graphic design these days. But there was only two. There was one which was for Lynn Kelly's Song for a Whale. There was a black and white illustration I did. And I think that was on the inside, or unless it didn't make the edit, I don't know. And there was another book I did called Grief Angels, where I illustrated the chapter headings for it. But that's kind of it. It is a different department, I think. But I'd love to be invited to design illustrations of interior stuff. Yeah, it's like great fun.
And then just because you mentioned that you used to read the comic books a lot, I was speaking to, we'll give another shout out to Thomas Taylor, who's within your region. He's also across the pond. We were talking about that graphic novels, or I guess you'd call it comic books also, are not really such a big thing in England or in the UK. So you talk about reading Batman and Spider and all the people's were there 5 comics that you read, or do you just have to know where to go to get them?
Yeah, I knew where to go to get them. There was just one shop in the little town that I grew up in. It was a little newsagent's where it just had a whole stack of comics, and it wasn't like I just saw them one day and just saw a big load of drawings that as a kid I thought, wow, that's really cool, and then just started devouring them. And I had quite the collection up until parents decided to do a bit of a tidy up, and all of a sudden my comics vanished, which broke my heart a little bit. But these things happen. It's parents do it. I think I've done it on occasion by accident.
Oh no! But why all the books? Why?
I know. But I've been to New York once, and certainly buying comics there was a much easier thing to find than in the UK. But there are specialised shops around. Yeah, you just got to look a little bit harder.
Hey, that's good to know. They're okay in the UK, everyone. They're gonna be okay. They have them.
Yeah, they absolutely. Yeah.
When you actually design your covers, which we'll get to the actual process part of it in a second, is that something that you're designing? Are you designing on a computer, or are you doing it by hand and then you transfer it to the computer, or how does that part work?
So I work on something called a Cintiq, a Wacom tablet. That it's, if you can imagine, like a giant iPad. So I do draw by hand, but it's drawn with digital brushes, if that makes sense. So it's connected directly to the computer. So there's no transfer. So in the early days, it was pen and paper. If I was to draw something, then you scan it, and then you have to kind of correct it in Photoshop. But these days, I draw directly into Photoshop on the display. Like Procreate for the iPad. Do you know that one?
Yeah, I've heard of it. Art in me is just something to look at, not to do.
Yeah. So it's like drawing. It is drawing on a giant iPad, essentially. That's what it is. Yeah. Oh, wow. So the line work is hand drawn, but it's on a screen. If that makes sense. So
does the feel of it, because specifically those of us who are a little bit of book snobs that won't go near an e-reader or anything like that, because we have to feel the book, we have to smell the book. Do you have that sort of sense drawing digitally, or it's not the same thing?
It's not the same thing. I don't know. I think newer models of what I've got have made it a lot more fancy. So you've got a surface which is a bit more rough. So there's more friction with the pen. So it feels more like you're drawing paper. But there is always a disconnect between the pen you're using, the little digital stylus, they're called, and the cursor that's on the screen. There's about a centimetre's worth of discrepancy. So that does take a little bit of getting used to if you're used to drawing on paper. It sounds like a weird thing to say that, but it does take the brain a little bit. Well, it took my brain actually. I'm not speaking for everyone here, but I found that the cursor being looking like it's about a centimetre deeper than where my pen was, quite disorienting to begin with. But your brain corrects. It self-corrects after a while.
It's so interesting. It's like each trade has its own like thing almost that you have to figure out. So going to the actual book design, how does it work from getting a project to whatever sort of time frame you have for it? How much information do they give you about a project for you to then figure out a cover design from? How does that all work?
That can all vary. So most of the time, what you're given is you're given a brief. Obviously, the book's being acquired by the publisher, so they will have read it. So the brief is written out, and they'll give in the brief a synopsis of the story. They'll give you a list of like comparative titles or titles in competition, so to speak, as to where they see it being sat on the shelves in whatever bookstore. And they'll also, if it's a comprehensive enough brief, they'll give you visual pointers as to what they want on the cover and in what style. And say like off the top of my head, say like a poppy flower is significant to the story, then you make a cover based around the poppy, depending on how big they want it, depending how important it is to the story. And it's a bit of a tricky balance, that one, when it comes to not giving too much of the story away. But there's other times where they've obviously read the book, but they'll ask you to read the manuscript. And I don't know if I'm correct in saying this, but my suspicion is usually when you're asked to read the book yourself before you do it, they're not quite sure how to market the book themselves. Huh. So you're kind of being used as a bit of a mood board in the first instance, Those ones can be slightly trickier projects, but more often than not, they're more fulfilling because you get to read the whole story. You get quite a personal take on it. And the design it's either too personal and it'll get rejected because it's not sales and marketing-able, or you'll get a much, much warmer reception to it from the author, especially because you've shown some respect to their story and they can tell you've got enough knowledge about the themes of the book and so forth and stuff, if that makes sense. Unless that was massively waffly of me. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, that does. That makes a lot of sense. So I'll repeat it to see if I get it correctly. Either you're getting notes from the publisher, and if you got the notes from the publisher, it's basically, you just do whatever the notes are saying, you just figure it out around there. Sometimes they might give you a manuscript, so you don't always read the manuscript. It's only sometimes they'll give you a manuscript if they don't have specific direction for you, and it's kind of like figure it out. Like make a cover off of whatever you're feeling from this.
Yeah, I shouldn't really say it's always the case they don't know how to market the book, because that could come across as quite insulting, which I don't mean to do. But there's definitely a feeling of sometimes where they kind of think, you're not quite sure how you want this book to look, are you? So then you have to give a whole blanket of ideas. Or if you're confident enough with one design, you give them the one design. It's kind of like taking a long shot at it, which can work sometimes, other times it doesn't.
Wow. So how much of that is actually coming from the author? Do you have direct contact with the author, or most of that is going through the design part of the department in the publishing house?
Yeah, it's all in the publishing house. I've never had direct contact with an author. I mean, only until after the fact, where say if the author's particularly pleased with the cover, they'll send a nice email, which is always lovely to read, and yeah, that makes the job all worth it. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh well. So even if they're giving you a manuscript, let's say, and they're kind of like, okay, what sort of ideas can you come up with this? Are there certain sort of, I don't know what the correct term would be, like styles or standards, or if this is an adult thriller, we're kind of expecting something along these lines, but not exactly along these lines, or it's just an open field of whatever you could figure out?
No, I mean, exactly how you just spelled it out that's exactly how it is. Yeah, we want something along these lines, but it's a phrase I hear all the time, but we want it to move it on a little bit, which is quite a nebulous phrase if you ask me. I don't quite know. That can mean a whole load of stuff. But essentially, they're asking you to make the next bestseller, because that's the cover they're looking at, that one that sold loads. But they want you to reinvent that wheel for them and sell as many books as possible.
Right. People pretend like you're not supposed to judge a book by its cover, but I spoke to a bookseller. Oh, there you go, another shout out. And she was saying that the books that they display cover out versus the ones that are just the spine out, the ones that are cover out sell more. It's people, they see it.
Of course. Yeah. We're visual creatures, if you ask me. And I think metaphorically, you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but literally, of course you should. Otherwise, I'm not doing my job right, if that makes sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
If you make a bad cover and you read the book and you look at the cover afterwards, you think, well, that's a little bit out of step with what that story was. And how did they get to that decision? All that kind of stuff. You've not done your job right if the cover's not been judged, or if you've not judged the story right for the book. So yeah, you should judge a book by its cover.
That's a really interesting perspective. It's almost like the book cover is the first selling point, even before you look at whatever the summary is or whatever the back blurb says. Like, that's what it is. It's like, it's almost before, I'm not even gonna look at what the book's about if I don't like the cover, almost.
Yeah. The cover is the first point of call with the selling point. And then once you pick it up, there's the blurb, and then that's the other selling point. So, visually, you absolutely should judge a book by its cover. Otherwise, the cover's failed to do its job.
Wow. You'd think as an author, like, I'm aware of this stuff, but I never really thought of it. I once did a quiz, like one of these, they kind of pop up of judge these books by their covers sort of thing. Like, what is your literary mind? And by the time I was done, I had like failed the quiz of like, you've rejected all these bestsellers over the years. And I was like, well, then someone should have given them better covers because these are all ugly.
Yeah, well, yes, I could go deep down into the rabbit hole on that one. I'd probably fail on that too,
I know, I say nothing. I actually did see, you have a Sherlock Holmes cover that you did, which I guess if they were, a reprint or something, they would have reached out to you for that. And you had, was it Jacob Have I Loved, which is a book that's been around for decades. So when you're doing a cover for a book that's already out there, how do you even approach that? Because there could be 100 covers already, or it could be like, what am I going to do that no one's seen before? Or is it just, I'm just going to do my own version of this? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, so Sherlock Holmes, was that Hound of the Baskervilles?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, those are where like copyrights run out, so they can feel free to publish those books. I don't know. I mean, I think with that one, I've done a number of classics now, and I either refer back to the first editions and take a look to see what's on them and try and follow some kind of aesthetic style so it harks back to its origins, or you just swing for the fences with it. And I kind of did that with Hound of the Baskervilles, to be honest. I did a drawing that I felt looked kind of interesting and had enough. There was some visual puns in it, as far as Sherlock Holmes and his cloak, kind of, as far as, this is off the top of my head, I did this one a while ago. So there's his cloak, or his cape even, kind of double acting as a hilltop where the hound is, and he's got his magnifying glass looking at the hound with the mansion in the background. So that one was, there was some art direction, and they wanted it to be quite bold in colour. I don't think I went all that bold in the colours, but I think I went quite retro and old-fashioned with it, but that one was just a go. It was kind of do you like it? See what you think. And they went for it. It was, there's not much more to that one really I can say, but I've done, King Solomon's Mines.
Yeah, I saw that, yeah.
I've done that, and that was a similar kind of deal. So looking at illustrations from around the time when the first edition would have been published, trying to adopt the kind of style of illustration that was being used then and putting it onto a contemporary cover now. And there's another one I've done recently called Kidnap, but I forget the name of the author to my shame. But yeah, normally, thinking about it actually now, normally it's looking at the contemporary art from when the first edition is and reappropriating it into a new design for a rejacketed cover now. I think that's my method with it.
Wow. So it's a good thing you didn't have to do Dracula, because I think that was originally printed just as a yellow book with like red lettering. There was no design on the cover.
Although I love to do Dracula, but yeah, I've seen that first edition cover. It's one of my favourite stories. I'd love to do Dracula. It'd be great.
Right? Who's listening? Somebody.
Whatever publisher out there who's listening, I'll throw my hat into the ring. Absolutely.
I guess there's also sort of like a challenge to it of doing something that's been done before, but not doing it exactly what's been done before versus creating something that's brand new.
I find it quite exciting, especially if the cover is asking you to do something that you know that you don't know how to do, but you'll say yes to the job because you want to learn how to do it, and it forces you to learn how to do it. Then you've got no choice because otherwise you're going to let down the client. So I quite like that challenge personally. I think it's great.
Amazing. And how much time do you usually get to design a cover?
That's how long is a piece of string really. So what I normally ask for is about 2 weeks.
Oh, wow.
But there's times where, say, like if a book gets dropped into a publishing schedule super late into at the 11th hour, then they might ask you for a design within 3 days with a kind of with their fingers crossed, and it's up to you whether or not you can do it or not, or they can give you up to a month. But yeah, I'd say on average it's between 2 and 4 weeks you get to design a cover. Yeah.
Wow. Have you ever had a book come your way or cover? Maybe I shouldn't ask this. We don't want to create any sort of bad juju or something, but have you ever had one that you're like, I have no idea what to do with this?
Oh, all the time.
Oh, okay.
I've got a number on right now, which I'm just scratching my head over. But if you ask me, I think even though you get on average 2 to 4 weeks to design a cover, realistically, if you're a freelance designer for books, you're not working on one project at a time. Because if you're working on one project at a time, you're going to go broke pretty quick. You've got to be busy. So once you devote attention to the project that you need to devote attention to, because the deadline's approaching, I would say it takes 1 day to come up with a serviceable idea, 2 days to come up with a good idea, and 3 days to make a good cover that's good enough to send up to the publisher. As long as you're devoting those 3 days for that one project, and you're devoting enough sleep to that one project as well. Because if you ask me, you can end up staring at your screen after, say if you get stuck on an idea, and I'm sure this transfers to other areas of industry that even goes outside of creative, whatever. There's, say, if I get stuck on a cover, I'll find, because I'm naturally quite daydreamy. I'm sure I've got a little bit of attention deficit. I'm certain I have. There are times if I get stuck, I'll get a bit despondent, and then before I know it, I've spent the last hour simply staring at this design that's not working. And then I think, oh, screw it, I have to give up on it, and then make myself some tea, sleep on it, come back to it the next day, and you've got a whole fresh pair of eyes on it, and you can take a much more positive spin on what you've done. That's how you make your inroads. So it's that first step that kind of damages your self-confidence a little bit. Because you'll get a good idea in your head, and then you start to try and bash out the idea, and you think, oh, this is rubbish, and then you start thinking, oh, well, I'm rubbish. But it eventually, there's a bell curve, like an inverted bell curve to it, so it'll get down to a point where you think, I can't do this, and then afterwards you can think, oh no, that's all right, and then eventually you think, no, I'm proud of that, that's all right, I'm good, and then you can send it off.
Yeah, that sounds like writing a lot. Not a little, but like a lot, yeah.
I'm sure it's exactly the same. And I'm naturally scatterbrained with this sort of stuff. So it's sometimes I need to have time away from it.
Well, and do you ever start, like, are you just sketching out ideas until you find one that you're like, okay, yeah, like where this is going, or do you like let it sit and marinate a little bit before you'll actually start doing something?
Bit of both, really. There's been times you just sketch and sketch and sketch, and you'll either hit the idea in your head either arrives on the screen in a way that you're completely happy with, which is always it's almost like finding money in your jeans that you didn't know you had. There's other times where you'll sketch and force an idea until actually this idea is thinking, no, there you are, I've got it. Or you find yourself in a happy accident. So you're sketching and something else happens in the design. Either you're sketching with a brush or you're bashing photographs together from stock sites or whatever, and there'll be something you'll do with, say, I don't know, a blending mode in Photoshop or some kind of crop that you weren't thinking about at all, that you just move it onto the cover and you think, oh, that actually works really well. And yeah, I'm a big fan of a happy accident, definitely. Yeah.
Definitely. Are there any sort of, so I'll tell you kind of where this question is coming from. I once saw something about like movie posters, the way they'll design posters for film, and then there was a while that they were using a lot of blue and orange, let's say, because there's something about the combination that's very eye-catching.
It's a great colour combination, yeah.
So are there certain, either color tricks like that or some sort of structural style or things that either like they're kind of the tricks to covers, or they're kind of things that you'll gravitate to whether or not you'll automatically use them? Are there things like that you're kind of like always make sure that X, Y, and Z, or I don't know, and anything that falls in that category that you could share?
I don't know, that's an interesting question. I think if I was left to my own devices, and say if you're doing a cover and there's no feedback to have to contend with, I think my colour palette naturally tends towards darker, and I'm often told to lighten my covers, but I think it tends towards kind of darker tones of blue, orange to yellow. I've always found that a very attractive colour combination if you give it enough atmosphere, if you make the cover look atmospheric enough. Or red, I would say. Yeah, blue and red for me seem to be colours that for some reason or another, I'll find myself going back to them all the time until I'm told to, say, no, this is like too much like the other one you've done, and then you've got to deviate it outside and push yourself a little bit further. But having said that, I am a big fan of a colourful cover. So there was a cover I did a few years back called The Chalk Artist, which was all, kind of all the colours of the rainbow, and it was all very kind of bold. I'm a big fan of like very kind of brash, like confident bashes of colour in your face, for want of a better phrase. So, I don't know. I think I'm quite a mercurial designer, really. That's why I can't discern the style of myself, because, I don't think you can judge your own work. I think any designer is their own worst critic. Yeah. But, my X, Ys and Zs are normally dealt with, aesthetically anyway, is by trying blue, red colour washes that have kind of a hint of yellow or white or some complementary colour to red, and if they don't work out, then I've got to have a think about it and ask the publisher for maybe some more comparative colours and follow the colour combinations and take my own direction from there after that point.
And then when you're asked to design a cover, is it ever the case, or I don't know, whatever your knowledge of it is, that they'll ask the same designer to design two different covers, one for the US edition, one for the UK edition?
Yeah, well, that's happened to me. There was a book cover called Extraordinary Birds, which I did for Bloomsbury in the UK. Oh, man, off the top of my head, I forget. I think it might have been Little Brown USA that published the same book. But I designed two totally different covers for that. And there's other covers where there's a contract in the job offer where they'll stipulate that the cover you're doing is going to be used both in the UK and the US. And from there, you then got to have a little debate with the publisher about, well, okay, if you're doing that, then I'm not being paid just for that one cover, because that's been sold in a different territory. But that's a matter of a contract. That's much more boring talk than designing the cover itself.
Well, just quickly, it's a one-time contract. It's not like per copy sold, or you also have to deal with the back end royalty stuff.
So I've got a few covers where I'll get royalty statements through. They're quite nominal, they're not very big. Yeah. But usually it's the case that you'll pay the flat fee for the cover, and if a different publisher wants to reuse your cover, unless it's in the contract for the original publisher, for them to be able to sell the cover on for themselves, to have world rights in perpetuity, basically. Unless you've signed away those rights, you can then choose to set your reuse fee for the other publisher.
So kind of like you're licensing the design to them or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Because without a contract, the design of the book, you have default copyright on that design if there's no contract. So you do have to be asked, and they need to pay. You're negotiated with and you're haggled down. But yeah, you get a reuse fee if they want to reuse that cover. Yeah. Yeah.
And then just ask one more question before we wrap up. When you're designing UK versus US editions, are there certain factors that you have to keep in mind? Like certain, the UK usually tends toward this sort of design, and the US you have to go toward this sort of design, or you're just kind of just doing your thing?
Interesting question. Yeah, I would say these days, at the moment, UK design, I would say, from my experience with the designs, with the covers that I've got in the UK versus the covers that I've got in the US, currently for me, US covers feel like they're a more expressive job, and you can get away with slightly more daring designs, slightly braver designs than in the UK. But as far as approaching the job goes, I'm no different to how I am with a UK client and a US client. But UK clients, I think it's still kind of a rule, really, where on a hardback, that can be more of a trophy, tactile, nice objects to have on your shelf. And the paperback is the more commercial thing where, say, if it's a big author, the author has to take up about half to 3/4 of the cover, and then the image comes underneath it, But even that, I don't know about that so much these days, really. I think it seems like it's going through a bit of a transition at the moment. It seems like we're on the cusp of a trend changing with book covers, I think.
Yeah, I've been noticing different designs coming in. I'm like, where are these coming from? But I guess that's...
Yeah.
Do you ever walk into a bookstore just to look at the covers there? You ever wander around and
all the time. Yeah, no, I do it all the time. So if and I hate to say it because it sounds like I want to go and toot the horn for myself, but there's been a number of times just where just out of like the equivalent of Googling yourself, but walk into a bookstore, just think, I wonder how many of my covers are out on the shelves, and just see how many you can spot. That's always good fun.
See, I wonder if it's better or not to see them there, because if they're not there, either the bookstore doesn't carry them or they sold out. So what do we really want?
Yeah, exactly. So you're either pleasantly surprised, or I don't know, the prints come out a little bit too dark, and you think, oh, let's look at. Oh, That doesn't look right at all. And, that's very rare.
They don't send you a printed copy to sort of proof it?
They used to send proofs. I think they still do every now and again, but less so these days. I think it's a cost-cut thing, yeah.
Yeah, oh wow. Oh, that's interesting.
But I'll be sent the finished edition often, yeah. So the actual book I'll be sent in the post.
Oh, cool. But you can't make any change at that point, or can you still say, hey, this came out too dark? Or at that point...
No, by that point the horse is bolted, yeah. So if I notice a mistake on there, then it's kind of like, right, you signed off on it. So I've been paid, I'm happy, I hope you guys are.
Yeah, or you just take the book and you chuck it back at them. No, I'm kidding. Don't do that.
It'll do that, no.
Yeah. Okay, very good. I have so many more questions, but we're going to wrap up anyways. We always wrap up with the fill in the blank of whichever noun you want to use for, I love it when you can do authors, publishers, I guess illustration or design or any of the things do X, and I don't like it when X. So how would you fill in the blank for that?
Okay, so I love it when authors get in touch with you after the book's been published to say thank you, because it's just such a lovely thing, and it means a lot that you've done service to their story in their eyes. That's always great. That's really good. I don't like it when projects tend to drag, because that's a bugbear of mine with book covers is sometimes... A lot of the time, actually, that a project can stretch on for anything up to 18 months.
Oh.
Which is fine if you're in-house. So if you're designing in-house, you're getting paid monthly. But if you're freelance, you're getting paid a flat fee. And if that project is 18 months in duration, then you've simply got no idea at what point you're going to get paid and where the finishing line is, because there's all sorts of protocols, cover-up meetings with the author, sales and marketing stuff, and chatting to the distributors, all this. I get how complicated it can be, but at the same time I kind of feel like, without wanting to sound too opinionated, like that lays the problem at the supplier's feet, which is not really fair. Yeah, projects that take too long is a bit of a bugbear of mine, yeah.
Yeah, wow. Well, at what point of the process is cover design brought in at? Are you, like, how close are you? Are you 75% in, or, if you would ballpark the number?
I think in the main you're brought in quite early. So there'll be a launch meeting in the publishing house, and that's when they'll decide who they want to design the book, whether or not they've got an in-house designer or the art director to do it, or they decide to freelance it out because either the art department's too busy, or the author's got someone specific in mind, or the art director's got someone specific in mind. And so you're brought in a good 12 months at least before the book is published. So your design will be used to send to distributors to sell the book, really. So they'll send out proofs to the distributors to say this is what the story is and all this kind of stuff, and this is the cover, this is how we see this book being sold, and this is where we want it being sat on the shelf, as in young adult or the higher shelf literary Jonathan Franzen fiction and stuff. So yeah, you're brought in quite early. You are brought in quite early. Your design needs to be used to sell the book. Yeah.
Oh, wow. You really have to get it right, because it's not just to readers you're selling it. You got to sell it to the suppliers, to the bookstores. Wow.
Yeah, there's a fair few people to please before you get full approval. Yeah.
Wow. This is amazing. This is absolutely... I'm going to have a whole new appreciation for book covers. I'm very excited. Thank you, Leo. Thank you for opening my eyes to all this.
Oh, well, it's my pleasure. No worries.
Yeah, I'm so glad we were able to have you on and that we were able to make the time difference work and all that to be able to speak with you today.
No, thank you for having me. Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
This was a bonus episode of Oh My Word podcast featuring designer and cover artist Leo Nickolls. To find out more about Leo and his work, please visit the link in the episode notes. To find out more about Oh My Word podcast and keep track of all the great stuff we're up to, please follow us on Instagram at Oh My Word podcast or look us up at eltenenbaum.com. Music is by Tim Burke. Thank you so much for joining us. Catch you next time.